Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Ethan and Brandon here once again to talk about playoff baseball. And obviously the Cubs and Padres look like they're going to be very likely opponents at the time of this recording. It looks like the Cubs are going to grab the number 4 seed in the National League, the Padres grabbing the number 5 seed in the National League, which would mean that the series, the wild card round that is, will be played in Wrigley Field. It's a big moment for the Cubs because they have not made the playoffs in 5 years. They haven't played a postseason game at Wrigley Field since 2017. So there's a lot of hype around that, obviously, for Cubs fans. The Padres obviously have been in the playoffs the last few years. They've been in the mix for a while. They haven't made that deep, deep run to the World Series like they've been expecting with this core, but there's still a lot of talent there. So let's break down, a sort of series preview, assuming that they actually end up playing each other. And let's talk about sort of who you think is going to come out on top of this, Ethan.
Yeah, it's really hard to say because I think right now, in years past, if you ask me, well, who's going to win the matchup? I'm going to say the Padres because I think in past years, as you and I both know, as Cubs aficionados, the Cubs have really been lacking, to say the least, in these
Yeah.
past few baseball seasons. However, they've really brought it back this year, and I think it's one because of our farm system. And you and I have talked at length about the different prospects that have come up from our farm system. I think that we've gotten great trades this past year, and our pitching staff has done wonderfully. I also will say that, again, you and I are both Cubs fans, but looking at it from more of a journalistic perspective, if that's even a word, um, I think that the one thing that the Cubs really don't have going for them versus the Padres is that the Padres have an amazing pitching staff through and through. Something
Yeah.
that the Cubs have struggled with their entire season is pitchers. We really only have one or two. When I say we, I say the Cubs. The Cubs really only have two good, reliable pitchers, and one of them wasn't even a reliable pitcher until halfway through the season, and that's Matthew Boyd. The only person that I could really think of who was a reliable pitcher through and through this entire season was Shota Imanaga. But if you look at the Padres lineup, if I name two people off the bat, Yu Darvish and Dylan Cease, like you can't even bat an eye at those two names when you're talking about pitchers. So I think when you put really good pitchers up against the Cubs, they always struggle, but at the same time, they're great offensively or defensively, excuse me. Switch that around. I think that the Padres are really good defensively, offensively. They can use so work. So it's kind of a double-edged sword here.
Yeah, I think it's, the Padres have really big names in their lineup for Fernando Tatis Jr., Manny Machado, Jay Cronenworth, Jackson Merrill. I mean, there's a lot of really talented guys, but any Padres fans will tell you this year, they have not been consistent. There's been a lot of like power outages, a lot of struggles. It's been very rare that the whole lineup is clicked at the same time. And again, that makes them very dangerous because if they are clicking at the same time, I mean, that is a really powerful offense. It's very potent. It's just that there has not been evidence this year to suggest that all these guys are going to start going just because the October lights are going to start shining again. It's been a very mediocre offense. They rank a lot towards the middle of the league in a lot of like offensive categories like runs scored, like WRC plus. It just has not been, given the quality of the names in the lineup, the offense has not lived up to expectations. But like you said, Ethan, obviously the pitching staff is really spectacular, specifically in the bullpen, right? I mean, their bullpen is the best in baseball, even without Jason Adam, who's now out for the season. I mean, Robert Suarez is a really great closer. Mason Miller is like the fastest thrower in baseball, is the setup guy. You have Jeremiah Estrada. I mean, you have Wandy Peralta. I mean, there's just so many arms that they can throw at you in high leverage situations. The Cubs do not have that, right? I mean, Daniel Palencia has been solid this year. He struggled recently, just came off the injured list. He's been okay. Andrew Kittredge has been a good trade addition. Like Caleb Thielbar's like been like a really solid lefty, but the quality of impact in the bullpen just does not line up. And so I would say if the Cubs are going to win this series, they're going to have to win in like the first 5 innings of every game. I mean, if they get to the late innings and they're down by a few runs, or if the games are tied, that heavily favors the Padres in that sort of matchup where it's just bullpen versus bullpen. And I say that mostly because, like you said, the Padres starting rotation is really good, but it hasn't been perfect this year. Very similar to the Cubs. I mean, like for as great as you Darvish and Dylan Cease are, they've had their struggles. I mean, Michael King's been really good, but he's been hurt for a lot of the year. Nick Pivetta has been their best starting pitcher, and this is sort of the first year where he's really been this great. The Cubs are in a similar boat where it's like Shody Managa's really awesome. Matthew Boyd's been pretty good. Like you said, he's had his struggles recently, but it's just I think in that aspect, the teams are pretty similarly aligned. So it's really going to become, can the Cubs offense, which should be better on paper than the Padres offense, can they get to the Padres rotation before the Padres start sort of, just marching in these really dominant relief pitchers?
I think the other thing to really think about, at least on the Cubs, is what the starting lineup will look like for the Cubs, because you also have people who are very new to the Cubs lineup heating up. It depends on if they're going to be there, like Moises Ballesteros, for example. He's only played a few games with the Cubs. However, consistently, he's been producing home runs. Defensively, he's been doing really well. But then again, you have other people who are still on the IL, like Kyle Tucker. We've talked with him at nauseum that he's been injured for so long. He can't really, he's still in physical therapy. And he's one of
Mhm.
these key players that people are hoping he can make it back in time for the playoffs. But if he can't, that might spell, doomsday for the Cubs.
Yeah, I think again, the playoffs are really where, in such short series, across a full 162 game season, right? Depth matters a lot. It really, I mean, it's why the Brewers have been so good all year because they have such a great deep team where if a guy gets injured, the next guy steps up. The playoffs are not really built like that. It's very small margin for error. There's only the wild card round is just first to two wins. I mean that is nothing in the scope of baseball. So it's just when you lose a guy like Kyle Tucker, that's a lot of impact to be losing from the offense, and you have to that forces someone like Pete Armstrong, who's really been struggling recently, to get back to being an all-star. It forces a guy like Michael Bush, who's been pretty good recently, to keep playing as well as he has been. It puts an onus on some of these guys who are otherwise, obviously PCA is a star, but like a lot of guys who are like more role players in like the grand scheme of the team, all of a sudden have to step up and be stars. And obviously, again, the Padres are dealing with their own, list of injuries, right? I mean, their position players are mostly healthy at this point, but obviously Jason Adams out, Nestor Cortez is out. Obviously, Joe Musgrove's been out for the whole season, as one of their better starting pitchers. So it's just, again, it's a war of attrition in the playoffs. This should be a really good series, assuming it comes to fruition. I do think on paper, because it's at Wrigley Field, it does favor the Cubs ever so slightly. Again, obviously, if the Cubs can get early leads on the starting pitchers, I mean that's going to be the way they win this series because they're probably not going to get to the Padres relievers too often. But again, obviously, great bullpens as we've seen win very often in October, and so that could be the great equalizer for the Padres who have not been very good on the road this year. But as always, we would love to hear your thoughts on this topic. This is a really great series for both teams. Obviously, the Cubs' first time in the playoffs in a while. Padres trying to make that deep run that they've been missing out on for a few years. So let us know your thoughts on this. How are you feeling about each team? Do you think, who do you think is going to end up winning? And as always, we'll try to respond to every comment.